Sorry, Cole, it's going to be a fun one. Okay. Just one. Okay, so here is the construct of the case. You are the last surviving member of an underground bunker apocalypse cult in the Midwestern United States. You are 30 years old, and you are privately rescued after 15 years of being underground by a SWAT team. You are begged to be interviewed by hundreds of paying media sources before your identity has been revealed. OPP Choice: expose yourself as the bunker person or conceal your identity and remain a normal person. Do you want me to repeat the beginning of the case?
Post-apocalyptic.
So it's not post-apocalyptic. You were fooled into thinking the apocalypse had happened. You went underground. Turns out it didn't. 15 years later, you're rescued by a SWAT team, and everybody wants to interview you. Do you reveal your identity as the person who was in the bunker or not? There was no one else who survived in the bunker.
We reveal.
You're going to reveal. Okay, interesting twist.
The trap.
Okay. Debate's so stupid. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What a terrible choice that you can never take back. I think that you, largely as the person coming out of this bunker, have three goals in society. The first one is to survive the happiest you can for the longest time. The second is to be able to develop relationships outside of that bunker. And the third is to rehabilitate back into society as quickly as possible and as best as possible. And I think we achieve all those things on our side of the house. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things in constructive today, but the first one is going to be why being a celebrity will be a total unwanted shock for anybody who's coming out of this situation. Why? First, I think people will be so patronizing to you as somebody who's been underground for 15 years and hasn't interacted with the rest of society for that long. First, they're going to think that you were stupid enough to be led into a bunker for 15 years and believe the apocalypse happened. But the second thing is that you'll be permanently labeled as damaged or traumatized, even if it doesn't end up being so, based on the fact that people know that you did that. Third, I think what's really bad is that you'll lose all access to privacy. And I don't just mean physical privacy, because not only being a celebrity are you going to be hounded all the time, probably for years to come, but secondly, mental privacy, because I think a lot of people force you into doing things like therapy right away, based on the fact that you came from this situation. I also think if anyone probably survived from that cult who was in charge, you're probably going to have to stand on trial against those people as being a person who was trapped underground for that long. But I also think that you'll lose autonomy over all your future decisions. Why? In order to make people like you, you're going to have a PR team, especially when you come out of a cult or come out of a bunker and everybody's going to want to sign on to your case. What's that PR person going to make you look like? Probably like fucking Kim Kardashian, based on the fact that that's what sells in America right now. So you're going to have no autonomy on how you want your personality to look, how your look is going to be, anything like that. But also I think that you lose all autonomy over your period of catching up to the rest of society. Why? They don't want you to feel weird. They want everyone to love you. So all the things that you're going to get the rundown on, you're going to get run down on very, very quickly by this PR team who's going to be like, oh, you better learn all these things so that you can interact with society well and that you'll be marketable. Go ahead, Sam.
But don't they work for you? So they have to do what you tell them to do, right? You're the one who's paying them.
Because you know so much about PR after having a 10th grade education and being trapped underground for 15 years. You're probably going to take the people who are nicest to you. You're probably going to take the people who have, literally probably the nicest suits on, because those are the kind of decisions that a 10th grader would probably make. But let's talk about how your personal relationships would be depicted, right? First, I want to talk about your family. So I think that not only you have this sort of exposure placed upon you in the status quo, right? What are they going to say about your family publicly? I think that they'll be criticized ruthlessly for first allowing you to do something like join a cult. But secondly, I think that not being able to find you, grieving, and moving on is probably something that they'll be heavily criticized for. So unless you're somebody who's going to want to watch your family's lives get destroyed around you, you probably should choose to conceal your identity, because there's no way you're going to be able to hide the fact that they are related to you. But secondly, I think I want to talk about the harms to the community, because the people you grew up around and the people who are involved in that community are probably going to be labeled as dangerous and risky and stupid and crazy, right? So that community itself will probably be penetrated by media for like at least a year. Let's be generous, like probably a lot longer than that, which means that you lose the privacy of that whole community. You sacrifice it yourself so that you can make money off of those experiences. That community is likely going to be the place where you're going to be able to make home after that kind of celebrity runs out, right? So you lose all those personal relationships and you likely burn a lot of bridges in that community now. There'll probably also be interviews placed on those people, documentaries made about it. It's going to be something that exists for a long time in media and will be definitely able to like be cited on like the internet. So don't violate everyone's privacy along with your own. Let's talk about future relationships too, because I think all the new relationships that you try to make outside of that bunker, outside of that cult, will be tainted by a few things. One, I think there's going to be a huge incentive for people to try to get close to you just so they can steal your fame and money. And I think that's really hard on a person who's probably doesn't have a lot of experience in the last 15 years with making new relationships or seeing through those things. But what's really bad is when those things run out, which they will, because America doesn't keep you famous forever, then those people will run out too. And all those new relationships that you've crafted will likely dissolve. But secondly, I think that people will believe that they always have an upper hand on you because of the circumstance that they came from. People won't establish relationships with you as an equal. Instead, will think that they're smarter than you, that they've had more experience than you, regardless how long it takes for you to make friends with them or new relationships that you have. I also think that people will oftentimes think that you're like a broken person or a damaged person because of those experiences too. Significant others. I think it's hard for people not to be able to talk about your experiences, but after the point where you have chosen to be a celebrity, where you've done all these interviews and you probably are tired of talking about those experiences over and over and over again, I think it's strenuous on a relationship to not want to relive those things forever. Because I think it's going to be really hard when somebody meets you not to be like, oh my God, what was it like in the bunker? Tell me the real story, not just what I read in this book. And you'll have to keep talking about them for the rest of your life. You don't get the ability to move on as a person with unique interests. And I think that's really hard for you to do, especially if it's going to be somebody who you date. Benefits will definitely run out is the third point we have. So the American public won't be interested in your story forever. And when you become accustomed to a certain kind of lifestyle and a team of people who take care of you and a certain standard of living, it's going to be really shocking to you, especially since you only have a 10th grade education, to try to find some other way to live. And I think that the better way to do it is to draw on the community bonds that you had before you went into the bunker, or even just crafting new community bonds once you get out, rather than relying on people to think of you as a celebrity and help you out in that way. I think it's better that you leave the spotlight and build your own life, because this is really a decision that you can never take back. And even if you spend 1 hour in the spotlight, it changes your ability to interact with people, to interact with the world for the rest of your life. For all these reasons, we proudly propose.
Did you find this hugely distracting? I have your face right in front of your face. Can I turn the brightness up? Oh. I did it. Honorable Speaker, you are a victim of a cult that tricked you into hiding away for a substantial portion of your life. You have been given the opportunity to share your story with the world to help make sure this never happens to anyone else again, and simultaneously be given the resources that you require to rebuild your life, which has been destroyed. The goals that side government gave you in this society that we will buy into is to survive for as happily as you can and to reintegrate into society. You need a substantial amount of money to rebuild your life from scratch. Keep in mind that after 15 years, your property has been sold, right? You are deemed to be dead. It goes to your your power of attorney. They sell it. The proceeds go to your estate or whatever. You probably don't have a great deal of money to fall back on. You have likely no nest egg because you were a survivalist, right? So you have nowhere to live. How are you going to get a job if you ask them for a job and they say, do you have any past work experience? And you say, oh, I've been conspicuously missing for 15 years, right? We think that there are extremely real and practical barriers to surviving and thriving in a society to having a 15-year period where all that you did was hide in a bunker, right? we think that you are more likely to, one, get a substantial amount of funds that you can use to, say, invest and generate an income. And second, your celebrity will help you get a job, right? Like if people know you and you're a news story, then maybe you can get a job as like a speaker series or something, right? Like to go on and talk about your story. It's like way more likely that you will be able to get a job and have a sustained income on which to live and subsist for several years to come if you use your celebrity to kickstart yourself. The alternative on their side of the house is truly destitution, right? They say two things. They say first that you should go and rely on the social networks that you had. So like, I don't know, go stay with your parents or your family or whatever. But they've also told you that everyone will think that you are crazy and might not want to engage with you, right? They can't have it both ways. They can't say people will not want to talk to you if you tell them that you're the whole person and now go depend on them to keep you alive and feed you, right? You can't have it both ways. You're going to have to fend for yourself to a certain extent, and you need the money to do this. The money is like so critically important to rebuilding your life, and they seem to completely ignore and not recognize it. Our second point in constructive is that you are a victim, right? The constructive we got is that you were a part of a cult that convinced you that the world was ending and they took you into a bunker and left you there for 15 years and everybody died. This is a terrible thing, and it is a problem that has happened not just this once, but probably a few other times and in some other kinds of ways, I assume, right? This probably isn't like a unicorn of a situation. There are survivalist cults. It's a movement, particularly in the Midwestern United States. There are people who buy into this rhetoric and have their lives meaningfully affected by people who maybe don't have their best interests or are radical ideologues. We think that you, as a survivor of this kind of experience, have the ability to send the message to other people who are on the precipice of entering a hole for a substantial part of their life that this is not something that you should do, that you should not join a cult, that there are people out there who will tell you things about the world that are not true and will send you underground where the sun does not shine. We think that this is a valuable service that you can provide to your fellow people who may be swindled in the way that you were swindled. Your silence increases the chance that other people will be victimized as you were. Go ahead. Yeah, you're not born into a cult. People recruit you into cults, right? People come and tell you things about the world. They're like, oh, the world is ending. We have to survive, right? When you are asked to join the cult before you drink the Kool-Aid, when the Kool-Aid is presented to you, you do have a meaningful choice. And if you have a strong countervailing example of the harms that can come from this kind of experience, then you are substantially less likely to join. So no, you are not just born into cults. You are not born indoctrinated. We think that we can help people not take that first step, which can lead them down a dark and never-ending hole. Okay. So let's go into some refutation here. Firstly, they say that you will not have any autonomy over what happens to you because you will be controlled entirely by your PR team. They spent like a minute and a half on this, and it's just not true. It's like, one, you don't have to hire a PR team, right? Like if the only PR team in the world, or the only PR teams that exist, are ones that make you look like a fool, then perhaps don't pay them to do that to you, right? And we think that it's more likely that you will find someone who will spin your story as that of a victim, that will say, here is somebody who came from a poor area in the Midwestern United States, who was sucked into this cult that had a great portion of their life taken away, right? Like that is a meaningful spin that has appeal to the audience generally in America and globally, and we think that there are ways to paint you so that you are sympathetic, and you can find PR teams that will make you look that way, particularly if you are concerned about this. So we don't think that there will be a lack of autonomy, and we don't think that it would be bad for your image. Okay, next they say that this will hurt your family. Okay, you have hurt your family. You disappeared for 15 years and they thought that you were dead, right? I think that the biggest harm that has happened to your family has already happened. And Meghan, in the same breath, says that this will not be a news story forever. And people will stop being interested in you in a year. So she mitigates her own harms when she tells you that any sort of media invasion of privacy will be temporary and you will be back together with your family. Perhaps the news spin will make it more acceptable for this family to tell people that, you know, my son is back, right? People are like, what happened to your son? He was gone for 15 years. What are they going to say? This at least gets it out of the way. You might have a sympathetic spin that you were a victim of some sort of cult attack or cult indoctrination. It's much better for you and your family and your community. And also, if it's minorly inconvenient for your neighbor to answer a question about what it was like to live on the same street as the whole guy, we don't think that harm outweighs getting your life on track, buying a house, investing in property, and being able to feed yourself. It's like when you just weigh these two things, we think sometimes it's okay to cause people minor inconveniences for the sake of you having a livable life. We are totally fine with eating those harms. We think they are minimal and transient. Okay. Their next point is that people will force you to go to therapy. No, they won't. If you don't want to go to therapy, you don't have to go to therapy. You're not going to be committed. You are the victim once again. Perhaps you should go to therapy. Maybe that would be good for you. But they're not going to take you away in a white van and lock you up in a room, right? It's just not how the law works. Okay. The last point that they gave, that's true. The last point that they gave is that people will think that you are crazy and you won't be able to make relationships. Okay. So they also tell you that you should go back to your community networks, right? So like, what are you going to tell these people? Where have you been for 15 years? So we think that there's already going to be some trouble on either side of the house in terms of making new relationships. And like we said, you can spin this to be the victim of the indoctrination of a cult, somebody who needs help, somebody who is a person towards whom the vast majority of people feel a great deal of sympathy and understanding, particularly if you talk to Wolf Blitzer about it, right? Like, I think that you will be able to make relationships with people and live your life better if you have this understanding versus the strange mystery of I've been gone for 15 years and I can't talk about it. That's probably a bigger obstacle to having a meaningful relationship with people and requires you to go to a place where you can't be with the people that you knew or that you loved because you have to explain it otherwise. On our side of the house, you get meaningful financial assistance to rebuild your life from scratch. You get a spin that makes it easier for you to reintegrate with those that you knew, and it is much better for your life going forward to be the person who lived in the hole. We are proud to oppose.
Joe does a lot of disservice to opposition's chances in this debate when, one, he fundamentally misunderstands our case and misrepresents it, but the constructive he delivers himself is broken and not particularly convincing and not particularly accommodating for these circumstances that this individual is in. I'm going to go through it all, explain why it's wrong, and then rebuild Meghan's case. So the first thing they tell you is, look, as a victim, you necessarily, before you went into this cult, your rights have been sold off, like everything you possess was sold off. Mr. Speaker, you were a 15-year-old child. There was no nest egg you accumulated or anything you were supposed to inherit or move on from. I think in those circumstances that is not something that is particularly relevant to this debate. But moreover, the other thing that they tell you is, the next thing they tell you is, look, make sure that you can make sure that this never happens again. This is where the bulk of their case relies upon, them proving to you why you can change the lives and the fortunes of others who could find themselves prone to going into these situations. 3 responses. First off, I actually think you do a significant amount of harm to other individuals. Why is this the case? Because oftentimes individuals who are prone to joining cults, they are oftentimes people who are desperately lonely and find resolution and find some kind of comfort in being in that isolated community. Or there's people who are truly just looking to belong. At the moment where you all of a sudden break out onto the national news scene and demonstrate by in fact joining those cults and taking those risky actions, you achieve the end of becoming more famous and engaging in all these relationships. You make it far more dangerous that people are likely to buy into that rhetoric in the first place. Moreover, I think they actually don't have a substantial ground to prove that people wouldn't join those. Why? Because oftentimes the people who join cults do so on the basis that they believe in the God or the priest who depends and shows them that. Insofar as people of the faith tend to think that they are better than other people of other faiths, it is highly unlikely that you can convince them by saying, well, we were wrong, that they are also wrong, given that depends oftentimes on them believing their faith and the people around them. So that's a bond incredibly hard to break and unlikely for you to be able to achieve. The next thing they tell us that, look, is that, look, PR teams, you don't have to submit to them. There's something that you can choose whatsoever. This is quite an essentializing argument because it does not take into account any of the nuance of our case. Given that you are an individual who has been gone for 15 years and hasn't observed how society has changed tremendously in the way the media operates, how we've moved away from the evening news cycle to huge social media, Twitter, what have you, internet websites, a system that you have never been a part of and haven't seen evolve. Thus, it is fundamentally wrong for them to assert that you can simply choose to hire the individual you think has your best interest, because that requires an understanding of the world as it exists. We think that you are not capable of making that decision also that the media companies who are looking to hire you will require you submit to a certain level of PR screening, will require that you change and shape their image to how they want to present you, given that the contract that people engage in the media always requires that you consent to and change your lines and the things you say, the way you dress, the activities you engage in. All things that I think are reasonable for us to assert are ones that you can't understand and ones that will harm your life in the long run. Because where their case takes the biggest fall is in how this will affect your relationships, the ones you want to develop, or the ones that you have had in the past. What Joe tells you about first your family is that they say that, look, your family will be very accommodating and they will want to engage with you, they will see you as a victim, etc. The issue that Meg and I present to you is that is far less likely to be the case, and they are far less likely to be willing to receive you back when it's not only that they get back, but also a host of individuals who are obsessed with your story, who want to interview your brother and your sister, if you have them, and show why it was, and then the media extrapolates, as they do in the case of famous trials and all famous things, about how the relationship between your family is what caused you perhaps to run away from home, and maybe you weren't tricked. All that media speculation in the long run harms your ability to make a meaningful connection back into your family and moreover the community you exist in. It means that they are less likely or less happy about the fact that you came back. So sure, they may win on the fact that, oh, now you have all this money you can buy a house with, etc. But I think that in those instances, the harms we present to you in terms of your ability to create relationships, which are far more important and will be far better provided for you. Also given that you don't need this money to buy a house, right? Given your circumstances, there are state and there is welfare that will come in and step in to provide you with those things, to provide you with an adult education and make sure that you can get back on your feet. What they can't ensure for you is your ability to form relationships in the long run, and that is where the biggest impact and harm comes out of this case. So then, yeah, sure, Joe.
Yeah, a lot of your harms require the characterization by the media to be negative. You don't have to know what Twitter is to understand if a news station is making you look like a crazy person. Presumably there would be some news stations that would make you look good, and you would pick those, and people would like you.
Yeah, okay, but here's the other thing, Joe, that you never contend with about our case, is that once you consent for your name to be published, then it is not an issue of how certain media outlets choose to portray you, given that it is now fair game for all media outlets and all individuals to comment and report on your story. That is something you can never take back and a narrative that you can never hope to shape. The way the media works in America is totally out of the case in the control of individuals. Look at how people still obsess over the O.J. Simpson trial and what these circumstances were, and how people are so obsessed with serial and whether or not Adnan really did it. They terrorize his family day and night to see if really he was a bad person, if the phone booths really exist in the Best Buy parking lot. All of which are harms that are really likely to accrue upon you, given that you are such a media sensation as the opposition wants you to be, as opposition wants you to speak out most often about your experience and explain why that could happen. I think then Meghan's case becomes far more relevant. Because what did she tell you? She told you that being a celebrity brings with it a number of harms that particularly you in your scenario, with a lack of context and a lack of understanding on the way society now functions, to a large part, have the inability to control or understand. Moreover, the effects then that those bring down to your family and to the people in your community, how they will be isolated and interrogated to determine the factors that led you to join that cult in the first place, or whether or not it was really you joining or you being kidnapped or you being forced in, a variety of things that will be discussed and scrutinized in the media and inhibit your ability to change that. Moreover, the most meaningful impact Meghan gives you is about how when you choose to do this, your name and your story is forever linked and impacted by this experience. If you want to, you can choose to never move on. Furthermore, Joe says you can't get a job because it would be weird if you have to define what those 15 years are. Our case isn't don't tell anyone, it's that don't let the media publish your name and be a media spectacle and go on interviews. All those reasons we're very proud to oppose.
Oh shit, no, I can't do that, can I? How do I? Government's case is basically premised on a bold assertion that the media will cannibalize your family as a consequence of you identifying yourself. I find it highly unlikely that the media characterization of a mother who has lost her child for 15 years is going to be, oh, she's a shitty person. The story is going to be, oh man, what a terrible thing to have happen in your life. I think it'd be hard-pressed to find a media outlet that would think it was in their commercial interest to attack a grieving mother who has just reunited with her child. Call me cynical. Constructive arguments. I think that this is a selfish choice. Even if we take Gov's arguments at their very highest, the harms they talk about at their very highest, it's still the case that this story isn't just about you. Lots of other people died. Presumably there are many families who lost children 15 years ago who never knew what happened to them. The story isn't about you. You are the last man standing. You have an obligation to tell people what happened. And you can only do that by going out and explaining to the public what occurred. Your obligation as someone who has survived, is to tell the stories of the people that died before you. You have an obligation not to leave those families guessing or never knowing what happened to the children that they lost. Furthermore, I think it's important for you to take the opportunity to explain why and how you came to be in this situation. Academics will no doubt be interested, and indeed people who study social isolation and social alienation, about how you got yourself into this position. Joe gave you the first line of this analysis, which is you need to explain to people how that they should avoid doing this. But I think you also need to explain to the public what put you in that position in the first place, and indeed what are the warning signs for parents and educators and psychologists of someone who's going radically adrift, of someone who is potentially vulnerable, and explaining how you became vulnerable. Because you have an obligation to the people who might be in a different situation in the future, who might be caught early before they become caught up in this business, that someone might intervene and say, there is something deeply, profoundly wrong with what's going on in their lives, and we can do something about it because we know what this looks like. We think that's critically important, and it's deeply selfish not to do anything about it. Go ahead.
At that point, then you have no choice about telling people how you got to that point. You have no privacy over your experiences or talking about your psyche, but now you have a duty to do those things.
Yeah, that's my argument. Fair enough. We disagree about whether or not your privacy interests trump the rights of other people not to potentially be in this position. We say, first off, that your privacy interest is minimal. Frankly, you've probably had enough privacy for the last 15 years. And like talking to some people might not actually be that unwelcome at the end of the day. But like being less flippant about it. And I know that they're arguing that like it's going to be difficult for you to interact with people. It's going to be like awkward. It's going to be challenging for you. But maybe that's actually a critical part of making some meaning out of your life. You've got to feel like your life is pretty meaningless at this point. Bear in mind, you don't have a high school diploma. You didn't go to university. You've never had a job. You have no skills. You've got to feel like everything that you've ever done for the last 15 years is completely pointless. But maybe this is an opportunity. Maybe this is an opportunity to be something that matters in the world. This is an opportunity to tell people that I was tricked, that I was caught out, that I was vulnerable, that I was isolated. But we don't all have to be like that. We can catch this stuff before it happens. We can do something about it. And you can actually be of significance. It's not merely feeling like you're significant. You can make a difference. So I think that's far preferable to what government tells you, that you should live a life in homeless shelters, on food stamps, on social assistance because you can't get a job. You can get the material wealth and you can make a difference. God, I don't find that particularly hard to defend. What did they tell you? Well, they say, okay, you were 15 when, so you didn't have a nest egg. That makes it worse, right? That means, as I said, you don't have a high school diploma. You have no skills. You have zero chance of acquiring those skills in any short period of time. Plus, you're probably too fucked up to work normally anyway, right? Because you probably have post-traumatic stress disorder of some kind. You probably don't have resources of these mental resources to do any kind of meaningful job for the foreseeable future. So you need to bridge the gap with money now. And certainly, getting mental health care is going to be a lot more difficult in the United States if you're living in a homeless shelter, which presumably is their solution to the housing problem. And I'll deal with the family stuff because I know I'll deal with that a little bit later because I know that's what they're relying on in support of this stuff. So, what else did they tell you? You'll actually encourage people by telling your story to join cults for publicity. I mean, if you're so fucked that you would join a cult for publicity in the first place, you probably don't need the encouragement, right? You probably don't need a role model for that, right? Like if you are so profoundly desirous of public attention, like, and I probably shouldn't be flippant about this because like the examples are pretty odious. They're like school shooters and things like this. That you probably take outlets, and I don't think you really actually do need. There really will be any particular. Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Yes, exactly. Given that things, for example, suicide copycats or school shooting copycats are exactly why the media is now considering not reporting on such things. Isn't it in your interest, if you truly want to help such individuals like yourself, that you not publish and not make it seem that this is the way to make it? This is the way to get famous and rich.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a risk, right? There's always a risk inherent in talking about bad things that happen. Right? Like that there will be copycats or something like this. I actually am not of the view that it's good to totally silence the discussion of something so incredibly significant. Maybe a better way of avoiding copycats is encouraging the media to report responsibly on it. Maybe government regulation are good ways to deal with reporting on significant tragedies. I just don't think not talking about it is a solution to the problem, particularly when it's something of such significant societal and academic interest. They talk a lot about PR. I don't know why this debate has so much shit in it about PR firms. I mean, like they say PR firms will make you say things that you don't understand and that will be bad for you and provide you zero examples of the types of things that they're talking about. Like their starting point for the analysis is that PR firms have an incentive to humiliate and degrade you, and I don't understand the analysis on which that claim is founded. And to engage with the point maybe a little bit more, a little bit less flippantly again. If they have an incentive for your story to work, right? They have an incentive for you to be a success, for both you to make money off it, for their firm to get the reputation of being someone who represented someone effectively. They have an incentive to protect your family because they want an ongoing relationship with you so you don't fire them. All of these things are incentives that make it extremely unlikely that any of the harms that they're talking about will occur. So what else do they give you? Actually, I'll summarize here before I talk about one or two other things. 2 points: principle and pragmatism. I always use these two. So the first is principle. I think this is like a rights clash thing. They rely a lot on privacy. They say that you should care more about controlling your own life and not losing control to the media. I think at some level you have to recognize that your interests have to give way to those of society at some point. And I think the point at which that happens is when you have a meaningful opportunity to make something out of your life, to do something that could really help protect people and give some closure and some explanation to the families of the dozens, presumably, of other people whose disappearance has literally never been explained. And, look at the other side of the balance. Like, how significant is your privacy interest? At the end of the day, their alternative to losing your privacy is living in destitution, is living an obscure life where they probably won't amount to something. I think it's worth giving up your privacy, right? Worth giving up your privacy in the pursuit of a life that can actually make a difference and the feeling that your life is something that can make a difference. So I think in principle, this is actually probably a pretty reasonable thing to do. It's probably pretty reasonable to sacrifice some degree of your not particularly important privacy in order to achieve these social benefits. But pragmatically, if you go through with government's plan of not telling someone, you will live in utter destitution. And this is a really hard point to make significant because none of us have experience, presumably, living in deep and persistent poverty. But if you live without any income, without any skills, and you're on the margins of society, not only do you lack material resources, but you lack any opportunity to develop yourself as a person, to live a good life. And this is particularly problematic in a context where you have no background, where you are a vulnerable person. We think pragmatically, if you do want to live a good life, a life that has some kind of meaning, you have to have the resources to do it. And insofar as this provides you with an opportunity to do so, maybe it's worth taking the chance on it. On the sort of pragmatic stuff, they talk about relationships, and that people are going to paternalize you, they're going to mistreat you, they're going to assume that they're smarter than you are, that they know more than you do. First off, I think that relies on sort of a weird conception about people. I think most people are actually pretty sympathetic. Like if they run across you and they know you've been in a hole for 15 years, the like instinct is likely not to mock you for not understanding how fucking Foursquare works. Like at the end of the day, I think people are empathetic enough to understand. And if you do run across those people, don't be friends with them, right? Be friends with people who will not insult you for your horrific tragedy. So, like, I think in principle this plan is really bad. I think in practice it's even worse. So you shouldn't support it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To address Sam's flippant speech. Okay, so first let's talk about your financial stability. Because sure, Op wins on that point short term. But what Mo and I bring on our side of the house is a better long-term plan. I know how much Cole cares about that shit. Okay, when you are no longer a media darling, you should have taken that time to build relationships with the people who can actually help you at the end of your life, right? Your family, you should have done things for them, and you should have done things like build a life for yourself right when you get out of the bunker to be able to rehabilitate, like go to adult high school. On the fact that Sam's like, well, you will clearly live in destitution in a homeless shelter. Like, I don't think that's necessarily true. I'm pretty sure somebody would take you in after knowing that you did get out of a bunker, because you could privately tell them that, by the way. You don't have to be a celebrity to be able to do that. Let's talk about your PR team, because they're like, oh, this debate is so much about PR. But let's talk about what the realistic thing is, right? Because their goal is to make money, which means that you do need to defer to a PR team who's going to be able to effectively do that. Why? You don't know how to read a contract. You were 15 when you went into a bunker, and they probably give you like the worst contract of all time. And if you didn't have that kind of PR team, you'd probably get a terrible deal. But on top of that, it's just like they need to spin you as somebody who isn't ordinary in order to give you that sort of financial stability. They're not going to put you in a positive light because it's not profitable to put you in a positive light, or to put you in a light that makes you look like you're still a smart, real, like actualized person in society, because that is not what would sell realistically, even in a generous conception of Op's case. Media outlets. So you can't control all media outlets. This is going to get away from you so fast that it'll be totally unable for you to actually just shut down people who are talking about this. Look at just a regular celebrity. They have like 15 articles published about them going to the grocery store every week. Imagine what's going to happen to you. I don't think that you can actually opt out of these things, especially if you're a profitable celebrity, like they think that you're going to be. Okay, so the media as a benevolent actor. So I think that when they're like, well, they'll probably be sympathetic to your poor mother, but it's like, it's not about them being sympathetic or being harsh on your mother. It's about the fact that she's lost all autonomy over people speculating about her life in media, right? Because you've stolen that decision from her. You've stolen her privacy from her, and you've stolen the way that she's going to lead her life normally, especially after grieving you. I think that's really sad that you would do that to somebody who took care of you, presumably. Okay, let's talk about your personal relationships. They're like, well, it's just a minor inconvenience for your community, and your family won't care because it won't last forever. It's not about that it won't last forever, right? The money won't last forever. What will last forever is being cataloged on the internet, being in documentaries, being quoted as all time as like being like the O.J. Simpson trial where people quote it as a joke, right? You will go down in history as being this family who did this thing, who had this kid, and you can't ever escape that narrative, and that's really bad. But on your community, minor inconveniences, I think that they actually don't give a very generous interpretation of this, because I think what's more likely is saying this community is full of freaks, or this community is not safe, or this community is full of people who don't take good care of their children, because the media isn't always nice, and even in the most benevolent situation, it is going to be profitable for some media sources to say that, and I think that's really important. On future relationships, I think they don't even touch this till the end of Sam's speech, where he's like, well, people will just be largely sympathetic because you're in a bunker, right? Do you want sympathy from every single new person you encounter for the rest of your life? Sometimes you want to be treated like a normal person. Sometimes you just want a hot dog at a store, and he's going to be like, I'm so sorry, here you go, right? Like, it's so sad. On the idea that it's like, your catharsis. So what happens if the spin is bad on you in the media, right? I think the media gets to decide how you're going to be portrayed, which means that a lot of your voice is going to be stolen, especially if you want to be profitable, right? It's not your story, it's about how marketable your story can be. And I think that they'll focus on the worst aspects of your story if it ends up being that way. On your rehabilitation, Sam says, well, you're probably too fucked up to work anyways. It's like you're going to work every day for like years now, because you have to be in the spotlight, constantly working for years. So if you're too unable to work, then it's probably a bad thing that you're doing that. On the idea of saving others and warning signs, I think when you have to be the person who constantly relives their experiences over and over and over again to point out warning signs, that doesn't actually solve anything. Why? They said you need to have catharsis for other family members. Go speak to them privately because you probably know who they are. Don't expose them to this media circus and have them scrutinized and their children. But also, I don't think you need to be a celebrity to be passionate about an issue and work in it. I think that you can help people without actually exposing yourself as somebody who's put in those same conditions. I think that there's a lot more good on our side of the house, and for these reasons, we propose.